So, greetings. My name is Mary Keller, and I teach for religious studies and African American and diaspora studies at the University of Wyoming. Let me start sharing my PowerPoint with you, and here we go. Takes a minute because there's a lot of technology at work right now talking to itself. There we go. All right. So, is the indigenous gone feral? From spirits to the spirit of climate change. So, I do the comparative study of religions, and one of my areas of study is spirit possession, which might seem feral to the rest of you all, and what in the world am I doing here with you? So, I'm just going to give you one little piece of information that will you'll notice this for the rest of your life, so you can thank me later. But the comparative study of spirit possession begins with I.M. Lewis and Erica Bourguignon tracking it across every continent and every century of human history. And then more recently, we have people who are doing things like doing cognitive science and spirit possession and wondering whether there is a human cognition element that creates the kind of anthropomorphizing of energy out there, questions like that. So you can take it from the just kind of geographical spread to the biology, evolutionary biology of spirit possession. In history, we have such things as like here's 1400s to the 1700s, and in spirit possession and Catholicism. For those of you who are Ken Russell film fans, you might remember the Nuns of Loudun. So 17th century Catholic nuns there, things going on with the Catholics. That could be a whole nother topic. More contemporarily, here is my stack of about half of my spirit possession books. So here we go. Days of the Dead, living in proximity to spirits of the dead. Korean, this will be the next new television hit, I suppose. Shamans, housewives, and other restless spirits. In New York City, Mama Lola and Voodoo in New York. In this case, the wife of an anthropologist witnesses a spirit possession. It impacts her a lot. She types up her husband's dissertation. They later get divorced, and she writes it up in 3 voices in order to try to take account of how does a social scientist discuss spirit possession. How about Malaysia, free trade zones, women getting possessed while working on computer boards in factories that have been placed on top of burial grounds. Jamaica and moral orders and resistance in Jamaica, found in spirit possession when you get the spirit in Jamaica. And then in West Africa, another question about moral orders. This woman actually brings Lacanian psychoanalytic stuff to look at desire and signifying and signified and questions like that. Michael Lambeck, one of the great scholars of anthropology. There's spirit possession in Mayotte. Paul Stoller, and embodying colonial memories. He's having a look at where the spirits of colonial so the Halka are a tribe, a troop of that experiences spirit possession among the Sangay of Niger, and they begin to get possessed by European colonials. So if somebody's having a problem and really needs to get it fixed, you might invoke the Halka to come, because what you need is the surveyor. And the surveyor, once he takes possession of one of his troop members, then he marches about and he looks at his clock and he stamps out distance and he makes sure things get done. So in a way, an Africanicity indigenizes the spirit of the colonials in that case. Very interesting. And then practically anything you look at that has to do with post-colonial feminism, you will find discussions of spirit possession. Oops, here we go, before we have a crash. You never know what happens with these kinds of books. And then also, not only has history and anthropology looked at it, but literature. So that, especially in a post-colonial context where one is spoken through not by mother tongue, but the mother tongue is the imposed tongue, And so then you get creolized language, and you're always kind of being spoken through. The way that spirit possession plays a role, here's trances, dances, and vociferations, agency and resistance in Africana women's narratives, and sacred possessions, voodoo, Santeria, Obeah, and the Caribbean. So the role that in literature, and we've got that from medieval Japanese, the Tale of Genji, one of the great Japanese books includes spirit possession. So now that you know I'm not the only one who's doing it, here's an example where a political philosopher also is looking at how an African political philosophy would take account of magic and sorcery as a player on a political landscape. And so in my own book, The Hammer and the Flute, this was a 2002 book, Women, Power, and Spirit Possession, I look at the work, the war, and the play that happens with spirit possession. So that means that I'm used to being an outsider at academic conferences, because from a modernist frame, spirits are feral. Spirit possession might seem anachronistic. It might notions of all kinds of potentially latent kinds of racism, even with is it backwards? Is it primitive? Is it primitive psychology? Maybe you want to try and be kind of liberal and nice about it. Maybe it's that's primitive psychology, and we do real psychology without spirits. So it's often understood as an oddity. What is this doing in the academy? So that from modernity's perspective, these images are from a big festival in Ouida, Benin. Voodoo and other spirits are feral because they gesture toward non-human forms of life, and they upset desirable or proper arrangements of nature. And in these images, however, I hope you are perhaps moved a little bit to consider that from an Indigenous studies perspective, actually a relationship to spirits and the spirited matter of land and material and human body and ancestors is the most natural and most important relationship that one can have in order to live in a good relationship with Earth's energy. Because the energy can bring you good stuff and it can protect you from bad stuff. So embodying, as seen in this example from the work of Wendy Woodward, embodying the feral, Indigenous traditions and the non-human in some recent South African novels. This is kind of my world. So she quotes Zakes Mda. I'm a product of a magical culture. In my culture, the magical is not disconcerting. It is taken for granted. No one tries to find a natural explanation for the unreal. The unreal happens as a part of reality. So the edge I hope to help bring with an Indigenous studies perspective on spirit is an edge that is beyond the dualisms that often haunt modernity, even when we try not to think dualistically, but rather a notion of these are different cosmologies, each that provide unique relationships of the human in its relationship to non-human materiality and spirit. So in order to get to bring this spirit possession stuff to a study, a consideration, an exploration of the possibilities and problems of the feral, I want to talk to you first about how the study of spirits from an Indigenous studies perspective is helpful to considerations of the feral. Secondly, I want to picture the spirit of climate change as the first ever global spirit and suggest that it is stirring up the biosphere. And finally, to ask if the spirit of climate change has made the biosphere ecstatic, beside itself, rendering the Indigenous and the possibility of being Indigenous feral. So what do I mean by Indigenous? It's a packed term, so let's try to look at a few layers so you understand how it's working in this. So the most popular notion of it is comes out of biology, so indigenous plants, indigenous animals. But humans, of course, are an animal. So what do you do with humans? And the idea of the term of indigenous peoples is actually a very modern creation. It was 1977 when a group of elders, including Chief Warren Lyons, went to the UN and were able, finally, after decades of work, to establish a permanent forum for indigenous peoples. And so at the UN, this is UN slide, you'll see here that these are vague, these are not country lines. These are kind of vague lines. The different colors are just meant to help provide you with contrast regarding their territories, right? So this is when we enter the category of indigenous peoples, because we are not engaged within the borders and boundaries of nation states. What we are looking at then, like this is a map of difference, and we are looking at a self-identifying marker by those people who gathered at the UN under this umbrella. It is a marker of difference. They say we belong here in our lands, that we are different from you other nation state people due to our ancestral ties to land and our myths that tell us that we are not above nature. And in this way, as the indigenous peoples movement has taken root, they have been leaders in appeals to the more powerful nation states to curb emissions. They've been leaders in climate change activism and leaders in Earth's rights legislation. So when we're talking about indigenous peoples, there is no litmus test, right? There's not something that the Inuit in a circumpolar conference and the people of the Amazon forest are going to, you can say, I've got the indigenous that in your blood, I see. But rather, there are internal to tribes, there are internal arguments about who belongs, and there are external arguments with nation states regarding who is and isn't indigenous. So I want you to, I think of it as a term of difference meant to signal a relationship with nature as an intimate and most important relationship of all. So, thinking about indigenous people and indigeneity led me to suggest a neologism. And I know jargon, blah, but I want to ask you to hang on with me. And in 3 slides, I will get you to the big bad spirit of climate change, if you would just hang with me. But now that you've seen the multiple layers of where indigenous and the idea of indigeneity comes from, let me just unpack this term for a moment. So, beginning with that indigenous peoples movement, I start this with a capital I, which is meant to signal, whenever it is the capital I, indigenous peoples, and they are self-identified. It's a category of difference. It's an ontological and an anthropological category that describes a state of being. But that I tie that with that leaning bar that indicates, you know, a kind of drunken tragedy, perhaps, that, but nevertheless, a linked memory to the term indigenous coming out of the natural sciences, indicating all life forms that developed to the specific attributes of a place. And that because I, too, am a human animal, as an earthling, I'm indigenous to Earth. I have an epistemological possibility of learning from indigenous peoples. We can, as humans, copulate and we can communicate. Now, this means I'm not claiming I'm an indigenous person. Rather, I want to claim that at an epistemological level, human knowing allows us to connect. But the capital I grant to those communities who survived contact and conquest. All right, so part of my most recent article was a claim that spirit possession, where it's happening, indigenizes communities. And this is because it brings a deep, it manifests a deep historical legacy of the land whenever spirit possession happens. So spirits are the aftermath of life. And you know, feral comes from funeral, right? So it also invokes this notion of the after of the domestic life, let's say, after the natural life. When spirits possess things, whether it's bodies, trees, water, they restore memory. They perform the power or agency of nature to make a place into their animated home. Spirits need matter, and so that's why you've got the relationship. If they didn't need matter, you wouldn't end up with a possessed person or manifesting in a tree. They need matter in order for their communication to happen, and when they do so, it provides a memory of the land. Now, they're also deterritorializing, and in this way, spirits give us an example of pre-commodified meanings of matter. It doesn't matter how self-possessed you are. If the spirit manages to manifest, right, it doesn't respect your property line of your body. It doesn't care if that's your tree. It deterritorializes modern notions of proper places, proper distinctions between human and nature, and that it is the time of haunting with spirits is absolutely fascinating, and it interrupts modernity's idea of progress, right? There's a chance that my talk of spirit possession was kind of like this awkward interruption of, wait, aren't we academics? The haunting of a spirit needs to make a claim in the present when there's disharmony, an imbalance, or an injustice. And so the past erupts in the present in order to make a moral demand of that community to change and alter the course for a better moral universe. I think all of those ideas are useful in considering the feral. So now let's get to our big bad spirit. All right, so this graph from 1900 to 2016 from NASA is organized through the central arc there according to continents. We're getting close. That's my timer to let me know. All right, so there we are. And now a second picture. And I've got to show you, I can't show you the whole thing. I just got to show you these bits and pieces. I want to ask you to think about, could this be deterritorializing? Could this be a past that is erupting in a present, making an ethical demand regarding a future? So now I'm on Earth, moving up into the 2000s. And I want to ask you to reflect on your reaction to watching both of those animated graphics. Because my claim is that we have rubbed the genie of, we've rubbed the pistons at such a frantic level that we have released a genie. It is through the imbalance of our past actions in our relationship to the Earth's energy that we have unleashed this massive spirit. So when I look at those as a historian of religions, I see them much like I see the use of an icon or a gargoyle. That these, you don't venerate the icon in Greek Orthodoxy. Rather, you don't worship it, you venerate it. And so you It provides you a window for proximity to an experience of the divine. In the case of the gargoyles outside of the cathedral, they provide that warning about the human deadly sins or human failures or the that which threatens the very soul of the person. If we think about Moses in the burning bush, a human can't really see the power of the divine. It is too great, and so the divine always comes in as like a burning bush or an avatar, so that one might be able to approximate what an experience with that much power would be. In the same way, big data allows our poor little puny human brains to begin to grasp that which we otherwise could not know. It would be beyond our knowing. So if place is now beside itself, we just watched two ways that you can see anomalies happening. If place is beside itself, if place is ecstatic, no longer static, staying in place, recalling the word ecstasy, that religious experience of unification with a divine power, if place is itself ecstatic, if place is stirred and afoot, have we now reached the impossibility of being indigenous? So as the trees make their way up the mountain in that tragic climb, right, because it will be limited to the height of the mountain, has the indigenous gone feral due to the spirit of climate change? That's my question. Thank you. And oh, that's not what I want. I'm trying to stop this.